Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I want to talk about something that many people experience, but not many people talk about openly: friendships changing over time. Have you ever looked at your life and realized that someone who used to be part of your everyday routine is no longer there? Maybe it was a friend from school, a coworker, someone you used to text every day, someone who knew everything about your life. And then, little by little, things changed. The conversations became less frequent. The messages took longer to answer. The connection that once felt so natural slowly became more distant. For a long time, I used to think that when a friendship faded away, it meant that somebody had done something wrong. Maybe I wasn't a good enough friend. Maybe I didn't make enough effort. Maybe I should have called more often. But as I've gotten older, I've started to see things differently. Sometimes friendships don't end because of a fight. Sometimes they don't end because of betrayal. Sometimes they simply change because life changes. People get new jobs. They move to different cities. They start families. Their priorities shift. And without anyone planning it, two people who once shared everything begin walking on different paths. I think one of the hardest parts is accepting that not every meaningful friendship is meant to last forever. We often assume that if a friendship is real, it should stay exactly the same for the rest of our lives. But maybe that's not realistic. Maybe some friendships are meant to support us during a particular chapter. A difficult year, a specific season of growth, a moment when we needed someone to understand us. And even if that friendship doesn't last forever, it doesn't make it less valuable. It still mattered. It still shaped who we became. And I think that's something worth remembering. Today, Sarah and I are going to talk about why some friendships naturally fade away, how that can feel emotionally, and why letting go doesn't always mean losing something important.
I can relate to that so much, Laura. When I was younger, I honestly believed that some friendships would last forever. You know, those friendships where you talk almost every day. You share secrets. You make plans for the future, and you can't imagine your life without that person being part of it. I remember having friends that felt more like family than friends. We spent so much time together that it seemed impossible for us to ever drift apart. But life has a way of surprising us. As the years went by, people started changing, not in a bad way, just naturally. Some friends focused on their careers, some got married, some moved away, others developed new interests and new goals, and little by little, our lives stopped looking the same. What surprised me the most was that there wasn't always a dramatic ending. No argument, no betrayal, no big moment where we decided to stop being friends. Sometimes it was simply silence. A little less communication this month, a little less the next month, until one day you realize that someone who used to know everything about your life now knows almost nothing about it. And that realization can feel strange because nobody taught us that friendships can change without anyone being wrong. We're taught a lot about romantic relationships ending, but we don't talk enough about friendship loss. And in some ways, it can be just as emotional. You might miss the conversations, the inside jokes, the comfort of knowing that someone understood a version of you that existed years ago. But I've also learned something important. Just because a friendship fades doesn't mean it failed. I think that's a mistake many people make. They assume that if a friendship didn't last forever, then it wasn't real. But I don't believe that anymore. Some of the people who are no longer part of my daily life still had a huge impact on me. They helped me during difficult times. They made me laugh when I needed it most. They supported me when I felt lost. And even though we're no longer close, I'm grateful they were part of my journey. Sometimes a friendship can be meaningful, valuable, and real, even if it doesn't last forever.
That's such a good point, Sarah. I think one of the hardest parts about changing friendships is the guilt that sometimes comes with them. Because when we notice that a friendship isn't as strong as it used to be, our first reaction is often to blame ourselves. We start asking questions. Why didn't I call more often? Why didn't I make more time? Why didn't I try harder? And while self-reflection can be healthy, I think many people carry responsibility for things that were never entirely their responsibility. Friendships involve two people. Both people are growing. Both people are changing. Both people are navigating their own lives. And sometimes we forget that. I remember a friendship I had years ago that meant a lot to me. For a long time, I felt guilty because we slowly stopped talking. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to find the exact moment when things changed. But eventually I realized there wasn't a single moment, there wasn't one mistake, there wasn't one conversation that ruined everything. Life simply became more complicated for both of us. We had different schedules, different priorities, different responsibilities. And neither of us was intentionally trying to create distance. The distance just happened. I think that's why adulthood can be so surprising. When we're younger, friendships often happen naturally. You're in the same school, the same classes, the same activities. You see each other almost every day without making any special effort. But as adults, maintaining friendships requires more intention. People become busy. Work becomes demanding. Families need attention. Personal goals take time and energy. And suddenly staying connected isn't automatic anymore. That's why I think we should be careful before labeling every fading friendship as a failure. Sometimes nobody failed. Sometimes nobody made a terrible mistake. Sometimes two good people simply ended up living very different lives. And while that reality can feel sad, I think it can also be freeing. Because once we stop blaming ourselves for every friendship that changes, we can start appreciating what that friendship gave us, instead of focusing only on what we lost. Not every friendship is supposed to last forever, but every meaningful friendship leaves something valuable behind.
Laura, something else that has changed friendships in a really interesting way is social media. Because on one hand, social media helps us stay connected with people we probably would have lost contact with years ago. We can see their photos. We can see where they travel. We know when they get married, when they change jobs, when they have children. And sometimes it creates the feeling that we're still part of each other's lives. But are we really? That's a question I've asked myself many times. I can think of several people I haven't spoken to in years, yet I still know what's happening in their lives because I see their posts online. And sometimes that's comforting. But sometimes it's also a little strange because knowing about someone's life is not the same as sharing life with them. You can know what somebody had for breakfast. You can know where they spent their vacation. You can know what promotion they just received and still feel completely disconnected from them. I think social media sometimes creates the illusion that friendships haven't changed when in reality they already have. And that realization can be surprisingly emotional. There have been moments when I saw an old friend post a photo online and suddenly I felt nostalgic. Not because I wanted to go back to that exact friendship, but because that photo reminded me of a different version of my life, a different version of myself. The truth is that friendships are connected to seasons of life. Some friends remind us of our teenage years. Some remind us of college. Some remind us of our first job. Some remind us of difficult moments that we survived together. And when those friendships change, it's not only the friendship that we miss, sometimes we miss the person we used to be during that chapter of our lives. I think that's why certain friendships are so hard to let go of. They become connected to our identity. They become part of our personal story. But something I've learned is that appreciating those memories doesn't mean we have to hold on to the friendship exactly as it once was. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is accept that people change. We change, life changes, and that's not always something to fear. In fact, sometimes growth requires change. Sometimes growth creates distance. And while that can feel uncomfortable, it doesn't erase the value of everything that came before. A friendship can change and still be meaningful. A friendship can become distant and still be something we're grateful for. And I think that's a much healthier way of looking at these situations than constantly wishing things could go back to the way they were years ago.
Sarah, as we've been talking, something keeps coming to my mind. I think one of the biggest lessons that adulthood teaches us is that relationships are not always about permanence. When we're younger, we often believe that success in a relationship means keeping it forever. A friendship that lasts forever is considered successful. A friendship that changes is often seen as a failure. But the older I get, the less I believe that's true. In fact, I think some of the most meaningful friendships in our lives are not necessarily the longest ones. They're the ones that arrive exactly when we need them. I can think of people who were part of my life for only a few years, yet they had a lasting impact on who I became. Some gave me confidence when I was struggling. Some encouraged me during difficult periods of my life. Some helped me see things from a completely different perspective. And even though we eventually drifted apart, the lessons they gave me never disappeared. That's why I've started looking at friendships differently. Instead of asking, why didn't this friendship last forever? I try to ask, what did this friendship bring into my life? Because when we focus only on the ending, we sometimes forget the value of everything that happened before it. Think about it. If a friend supported you during a difficult year, does that support become meaningless just because you're no longer close today? Of course not. If someone helped you grow, inspired you, or made your life better during a particular chapter, that contribution still matters. I think one reason people struggle with changing friendships is because we naturally resist change. We want things to stay familiar. We want people to stay where we've always known them. But life doesn't work that way. People evolve. Their priorities change. Their interests change. Their responsibilities change. And we change too. Sometimes we don't even notice how much we've changed until we reconnect with someone from years ago. Have you ever had that experience? You meet an old friend for coffee after a long time, and part of the conversation feels familiar. You still care about each other. You still respect each other. But you also realize that you're not the same people anymore. The things that once connected you may no longer be central in your lives. And that's not necessarily sad. It's simply reality. I think maturity is learning to appreciate relationships without trying to control them, to appreciate people without demanding that they stay exactly the same, to appreciate memories without becoming trapped inside them. Because if we're honest, some friendships are meant to last a season, others last many years. A few last a lifetime, and none of those outcomes automatically determines their value. What determines their value is the impact they had while they were part of our lives. And personally, I found a lot of peace in that idea because it allows me to look back with gratitude instead of regret. Instead of focusing on who isn't here anymore, I can focus on what they contributed to my journey. The laughter, the conversations, the support, the lessons, the memories. Those things don't disappear simply because the friendship changed. They remain part of us. And maybe that's the healthiest way to view friendship as adults. Not as something we own, not as something we control, but as something we experience, appreciate, learn from, and carry with us as we continue moving forward through life.
Laura, listening to you talk about this reminds me of something I've been thinking about for a long time. I believe one of the most beautiful parts of life is that people leave traces in us, even when they are no longer walking beside us. When we're young, we often imagine life as a story where the important people stay forever, but real life is much more complex than that. People enter our lives at different moments. Some stay for a few months. Some stay for a few years, some stay for decades. And while we usually focus on how long a friendship lasted, I've started to think that maybe the better question is how deeply it mattered. Because if we're honest, some people can be in our lives for 20 years and barely change us. And other people can be there for a single year and completely transform the way we see ourselves and the world. That's why I've stopped measuring friendships only by their duration. I try to measure them by their impact, by the memories they created, by the lessons they taught me, by the support they gave me when I needed it most. I remember reading a quote once that said, people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And whether that quote is completely true or not, I think there's wisdom in it. Not every friendship is meant to become permanent. Some friendships teach us confidence. Some teach us resilience. Some teach us trust. Some teach us forgiveness. And sometimes the friendship itself ends, but the lesson remains. For a long time, I thought letting go meant forgetting. But I've realized those are two completely different things. You can let go without forgetting. You can move forward without erasing the past. You can accept that a friendship has changed while still appreciating everything it once meant to you. And honestly, I think that's a much healthier way to approach these situations. Because when we refuse to let go, we often become stuck comparing the present to the past. We keep asking why things changed, why people changed, why life changed. But those questions rarely bring peace. What brings peace is acceptance. Acceptance that people grow. Acceptance that relationships evolve. Acceptance that some chapters naturally come to an end. And perhaps most importantly, acceptance that an ending doesn't automatically make something sad. Sometimes an ending simply means that a chapter has fulfilled its purpose. When I think about old friendships now, I try not to focus on what I lost. I focus on what I received. The laughter, the conversations, the support, The memories, the experiences, those things are still part of my life. They helped shape who I am today, and nobody can take that away. So if you're listening right now and you've been thinking about a friendship that has faded over time, maybe this is something worth remembering. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to force things back to the way they were. And you don't have to pretend those memories didn't matter. Sometimes the most mature thing we can do is simply be grateful. Grateful that someone was part of our journey, grateful for what they taught us, and grateful for the chapter we shared, even if that chapter eventually came to an end. Because not every friendship is meant to last forever, but every meaningful friendship leaves something behind, and sometimes that's more than enough.